Hi, so today I'm going to be talking about something a little more controversial, PC. And I don't mean the debate between PC and consoles because that's a little too controversial for me. No, I mean political correctness. And what is political correctness?
PC is, of course, short for politically correct. Political correctness is avoiding words or behaviors that exclude, marginalize, or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against.
I'm going to put political correctness in the simplest of terms I could possibly put it. Political correctness is feels over reals. Your feelings matter more than facts do. That's what political correctness is.
Those are two very different definitions. It's really hard for us to have a conversation if the words we're using have different meanings for different people. Maybe we should try a more objective source, say Mr. Webster. Politically correct, conforming to a belief that language and practices which could offend political sensibilities, as in matters of sex or race, should be eliminated. Well, that sounds pretty definitive. But if we go and check the Oxford English Dictionary, we come to something else. Politically correct, exhibiting or failing to exhibit political correctness. Well, that's not very useful. Here, political correctness, the avoidance of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalize, or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. So it turns out that the dictionaries don't even agree on what is politically correct, though maybe some of that could be because across the pond the concept is a little different. But where does political correctness come from? The term was coined in the Soviet Union somewhere in the 1930s, and it was used by members of the Communist Party to criticize other members who were a little dogmatic in their approach. Basically, they were putting party principles above basically reality. Chiefly, it was used as a criticism against Stalinists. But people who were too critical of Stalin had a bad habit of turning up in gulags, so the term sort of fell out of favor for a while. Political correctness sort of languished in academia for the next several decades. It was only used a little bit by academic feminists, sort of as in a form of self-criticism. The term didn't make the jump from the dusty, boring shells of academia into popular discourse until the early 90s. This was after a book published by Alan Bloom called The Closing of the American Mind, and then it was followed by an article in the New York Times by Richard Bernstein. Originally, the term was used as a pejorative by conservatives in academia, for example by Dinesh D'Souza, and then more broadly by, for example, the President Ronald Reagan, as a criticism of a left-wing movement in education that prescribed certain behavioral or particularly speech requirements on students, especially in universities. Because of the political origin of the term, specifically being used by one group to criticize another group, the term became very muddled, and this sort of led to our divergent definitions for the term. On the one hand, you had people more on the left who saw political correctness as a form of inclusion and bringing in disadvantaged voices to public discourse, while people more on the conservative side saw it as an attempt to stifle free speech. However, there's a pretty broad consensus on what PC is, regardless of political affiliation. I mean, if you say PC, most people understand what you're saying, whether they agree with it or not. It's basically about what should be acceptable speech and behavior. Now, it's important to remember that most people do agree on a certain amount of restriction on speech and behavior, especially things that they consider unacceptable. For example, metaphorically speaking, shouting fire in a crowded theater is something that most people would agree is not a good idea. Similarly, they won't agree, for example, with curse words being put on children's television. Another thing that's important to point out is that even though PC is sort of associated with left-wing ideas, the right also has its form of PC police, though it's not often called political correctness. An example of political correctness on the right wing would be flag burning. Burning the American flag is seen as a form of expression, basically saying that you're really annoyed about something in the United States. However, people on the right would consider that as very offensive, and a lot of them want it banned. Another example might be the discussion about the war on Christmas, Merry Christmas versus Happy Holidays. Another example might be the Freedom Fries incident from early 2003 when France did not support the United States invasion of Iraq. A lot of people on the right called for changing the name French fries to Freedom Fries. Trying to rename something for political reasons is a form of political correctness, and it's not all that different than trying to rename, for example, the name of a football team. However, another instance, and probably a better example of what happens when PC goes too far, would be McCarthyism. At the time, of course, McCarthyism was not called political correctness, because political correctness hadn't entered our lexicon yet. But it does match all the criteria for both the dictionary as well as the historic idea of political correctness. Blacklisting certain directors or actors or banning certain movies is not all that different from boycotting certain businesses or banning certain books because they have the wrong words in them. So political correctness is something that goes across the political spectrum. Choosing which words are acceptable is a core element of PC. For example, banning the N-word, or getting scandalized because someone dropped the F-bomb, or prescribing that certain pronouns need to be used for certain people. And word choice does have a big impact on how we perceive ideas and certain things. For example, if I were to say free education, I'd get a much more positive response than if I said taxpayer-funded education, even though it's basically the same thing. And this is the really dangerous thing about political correctness, because the line between linguistic restraint out of politeness and being outright censored is pretty mobile. It's not so much blurred as it moves depending on the subjective nature of what people find offensive. So if we see PC as trying to avoid causing offense, we have to remember how so incredibly fantastically tempting it is to be able to ban people that say things that we don't like. Because what is offensive tends to be very subjective, people can take advantage of that and then call things that they don't like and don't agree with as offensive, and then never have to face any criticism or lose an argument. This is why we as a society have to be extremely vigilant of interest groups who are trying to push the boundaries of what is acceptable to control within our social discourse in the name of political correctness. It's important to realize that no one is going to come out and say that they're trying to control people's free speech or to control what people think and say. They're going to frame their argument as promoting free speech. It'll sound something like this.
In fact, political correctness is expanding free speech. We're adding words to the dictionary every year in an effort to promote more inclusive and respectful speech.
In order for us to start using these new words and ideas, it does not mean that we have to stop other people from using these other words and ideas. Free speech is all about all ideas for everyone, including and especially people who have ideas and thoughts that we don't like. And just because we're talking about this idea doesn't mean that other people have to stop talking about other ideas. The marketplace of ideas is not a zero-sum game. Just because new ideas are coming into the public discourse, it doesn't mean that other ideas have to be pushed out of public discourse. And let's not forget that while McCarthyism was doing its thing, people that supported it were saying that it was all about defending freedom, and especially free speech, against communist tyranny. They characterized communism as an oppressive regime that was exclusionary and would deny people's right to free expression, and that's why it was important for us to deny the communists the right to free expression. So a certain amount of decency in the form of tolerance and respect and inclusiveness and openness is necessary in order for us to have free speech and a free exchange of ideas. We just have to remember that some people are going to try and use those as an excuse to be marginalizing and exclude ideas that they don't like. So PC is not necessarily a threat to free speech. We do have to be extremely vigilant about how it's enforced. And we have to be especially wary of instances where criticism of political correctness itself has become politically incorrect. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please let me know by subscribing so I can make more videos for you guys. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.